The moment my son-in-law put his hand on my chest and shoved me into the hallway wall, I knew it had gone too far. My daughter was standing right there. She watched it happen. She didn't say a word. I heard my granddaughter cry from her bedroom upstairs, 8 years old and already learning what it sounds like when the adults in her house stop pretending everything is fine. I grabbed my coat off the hook by the door. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. I walked out into the cold November air and I didn't look back. 2 days later, my neighbor texted me a photo. My daughter and her husband were in my backyard. Their friends crowded around the fire pit I built with my own hands the summer after my husband passed. There were wine bottles and laughter, and someone had strung up those little patio lights I bought years ago and never got around to hanging. My daughter was raising a glass and grinning, and even from a distance, from a blurry photo taken through a fence slat, I could read what she was saying. I could read her lips. Finally. I am 67 years old. I spent 40 years as a registered nurse at Queensway Carleton Hospital in Ottawa. I have held the hands of dying strangers. I have worked overnight shifts in December when the roads were ice, and my own children were home asleep and I still showed up. I built a life the slow, careful way, the way my mother taught me, dollar by dollar, decision by decision. The house on Elm Grove Drive was mine, every inch of it. My name alone on the deed, because Raymond and I agreed when we bought it in 1998 that it made sense that way, for tax reasons, for simplicity. We were married 31 years, and we never needed a piece of paper to tell us what belonged to both of us. When Raymond died 4 years ago from a stroke he never saw coming, I was left with the house, a pension, a small amount of savings, and a daughter named Claire who cried at the funeral and held my hand and told me I would never have to face anything alone. I believed her. That is the part I have to live with. I believed her completely. Claire was 38 when Raymond died. She had been with her husband Marcus for 6 years by then. I did not like Marcus from the beginning, and I told myself that was just a mother being protective. He was charming in the way that certain men are charming, the kind of charm that is actually just confidence borrowed from other people's discomfort. He spoke loudly at dinner. He interrupted. He had an opinion about everything and apologized for none of them. But Claire loved him, and he had never been cruel to her. Not that I saw, so I kept my feelings to myself and smiled when I was supposed to smile. They lived in a rented apartment in Canada. Marcus worked in project management and made decent money, or so I assumed. Claire had gone part-time at her job after their daughter Sophie was born. They seemed to manage. Then Claire got pregnant again, unexpectedly, and Marcus's company downsized, and suddenly they were not managing at all. Claire called me on a Tuesday evening in February, 3 months after Raymond's funeral, and she was crying before she finished saying my name. "Mom, we're really struggling. The rent went up again. With 2 kids and me not working full-time, we can't make it. I don't know what to do." I listened. I felt the pull in my chest that every mother knows, that instinct to fix things, to protect. I asked how much they were short. She told me. I said I would help with the shortfall that month. She thanked me and hung up, and I sat in my kitchen and looked at the chair Raymond used to sit in and thought about how I didn't want to be alone in this big house anyway. When she called again the following week, she asked if they could stay with me, just until they got back on their feet. 6 months, maybe 8. She said Marcus had a lead on a new contract. She said Sophie was asking about Grandma's house all the time, and wouldn't it be nice for the girls to know me better while they were young? She said I wouldn't even notice they were there. I said yes before she finished the sentence. The first few weeks were genuinely good. The house felt alive again. Sophie ran down the hallway in her socks, and the baby, Lily, slept in the portable crib I set up in the spare room, and I woke up early to make oatmeal before anyone else was awake, and for the first time since Raymond died I felt like myself. Like there was a reason to move through the day at a certain pace. Marcus was polite in that initial period. He thanked me for meals. He shoveled the driveway without being asked. He and Claire put the girls to bed, and then the 3 of us would sit in the living room and watch something on television, and it almost felt like a family. Almost. But there was something underneath it, something I noticed in small moments. The way Marcus looked at the living room like he was measuring it. The way he would rearrange things on the kitchen counter, and then look at me like he was daring me to say something. The way he referred to the house as here instead of your place. Small things. The kind of thing you can convince yourself means nothing. By April, he had moved his gym equipment into my garage. I hadn't been consulted. I went out one morning to get the snow tires I was finally taking in for storage and found 4 rubber floor mats covering the concrete and a weight rack bolted into the wall. Bolted. I went inside and found Claire making coffee and asked her about it. She said Marcus needed somewhere to work out and it wasn't hurting anything. I said he bolted something into my wall without asking me. She looked at me with this expression I had not seen before, something tired and slightly distant, like I was a problem she was already exhausted by. "Mom, he just needs his space. There's plenty of room. Can we not make everything a big deal?" I let it go. I told myself it was a stressful time for everyone. By June, Claire had moved things around in the kitchen. My pots were in a different cupboard. The cutting board I had used for 20 years was in the donation pile by the front door. Marcus had replaced the living room curtains without mentioning it. They were gray, heavy things that blocked most of the light. I preferred my cream ones, the ones that let the morning sun come through. When I took the gray curtains down and put mine back up, Marcus asked Claire about it at dinner that evening, speaking about me in the third person while I was sitting at the table. "Is she serious with this? Those curtains were expensive." I said, "You can speak to me directly, Marcus." He looked at me with something that was not quite amusement and not quite contempt, but somewhere between the two. "Sure, Margaret. Are you serious? We're living here. We need to feel comfortable." I told him I was also living there, that it was my home. He shrugged and looked at his phone. "I want to explain something about why I did not act sooner, because I know what people think when they hear a story like this. They think, why didn't you just say something? Why didn't you put your foot down at the beginning?" I have asked myself the same question many times in the months since, lying awake in a bedroom that used to feel safe. The honest answer is this: Claire was my child. I had held her when she was an hour old. I had sat with her through every hard thing her life had brought, and she had sat with me through mine. When you love someone that way, you do not stop loving them because they disappoint you. You keep trying to find the version of them that you recognize. You keep making room. And every time you make room, there is a little less of it left for yourself, and you barely notice because it happens so slowly, so gradually, that by the time you realize what has happened, you are already living in the margins of your own life. By September, I was sleeping in the small bedroom at the back of the house. My bedroom, the one Raymond and I shared, was now theirs. Claire had asked me in July, very gently, very carefully, if I would mind. The baby was waking up at night, and they needed to be closer to her. The master bedroom was larger. It had its own ensuite. I had said no at first. I said this clearly and without anger. "No, I'm not comfortable with that," Claire had cried. Not dramatically, just quietly, the way she cried as a child when she felt she had done something wrong. She said she was sorry for even asking. And then 3 days later she brought it up again, and then again, each time a little more worn down, a little more desperate sounding, until I said yes just to stop the conversation, just to stop the feeling that I was somehow the one causing harm. That is how it works. That is what I could never have explained to someone who hadn't lived it. The back room had a window that faced the fence. There was no closet, so my clothes stayed in boxes stacked along the wall. In October, the furnace made a loud clicking sound every time it kicked on, and my room was closest to it. I woke up at every click. I was 66 years old, a retired nurse who had spent 4 decades caring for other people, and I was sleeping in a storage room in my own house. The money situation was the next thing. Marcus had told me early on that they would contribute to the household expenses. $150 a week, he said. Cash. It never happened. Not once. When I brought it up to Claire, she said Marcus was waiting on his contract payment and not to worry about it. They would settle up. When I brought it up again in November, she asked me to please not put pressure on her husband when he was already stressed. I started keeping a notebook. I wrote down every bill, every grocery receipt, every hydro payment, every tank of propane for the fire pit. In 11 months, I had paid out over $22,000 more than I would have spent living alone. $22,000 from my savings, from my pension, from the money Raymond and I had set aside carefully for years, so I would be comfortable in my old age. Marcus began inviting people over without asking. His friends from the old job, Claire's sisters, people I had never met who filled my kitchen and used my good dishes and left rings on the wooden dining table. Raymond and I drove to Kingston to buy at an estate sale the year Sophie was born. I started eating dinner in my room. No one invited me to join them. Once, one of Marcus's friends asked whose house it was, and I heard Marcus say, "It's a family property, sort of a shared situation." I was standing 3 feet away. He didn't look at me. The incident with the bank account happened in January. I received a notice from my credit union about a line of credit I had not applied for. $12,000, approved in my name, and 3 months of draws already recorded. I went to the branch the next morning, before I said anything at home. The accounts manager showed me the application. My name, my SIN number, my address. The signature was not mine. It was close, a careful attempt, but the G in my last name hooks a specific way that I have done since I was 12 years old, and this signature didn't have that. I sat in that plastic chair across from the accounts manager with my hands very still in my lap, and I asked her to flag the account immediately. She asked if I knew who might have done this. I told her I had a suspicion. I went home. I did not say anything right away. I went to the room where I kept my files, the folder with the house deed, my will, my pension documents, my insurance papers. The folder was there, but it was not in the right order. Pages had been taken out and put back. The house deed was photocopied. I could see the fold marks from the copy machine. Someone had been through my things. Someone had made copies. That night I heard Claire and Marcus talking after they thought I was asleep. I was in the hallway getting a glass of water. Their bedroom door was open a few inches. Marcus said, "If she puts the house in both our names now, it simplifies everything when she's gone. We could even use it as collateral." Claire said she didn't know. She said she wasn't sure her mom would go for it. Marcus said her mom would do whatever Claire asked her to do. She always had. She just needed to be asked the right way, at the right moment. Claire was quiet for a few seconds and then she said, "Okay. Just, okay." I went back to my room. I sat on the edge of the bed. I did not cry. I had passed the point of crying some time ago without noticing exactly when. I felt something cold and clear settle into my chest. Not rage, not grief, something more like resolution. I spent the next 2 weeks being careful. I went to see a lawyer named Patricia Okafor on Carling Avenue. I had found her through the Law Society of Ontario Referral Service. I brought the bank documents, my copies of the house deed, the notebook with every expense I had tracked, and a photograph I had taken with my phone of the signature on the fraudulent credit application, zoomed in beside a scan of my real signature. I also brought a letter from my credit union confirming the fraudulent draw. Patricia Okafor was 52 years old, small and precise, with reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She went through everything I gave her without changing her expression. When she finished, she looked up. "You've been very organized about this." "I was a nurse for 40 years, I told her. "You document everything." She told me I had a strong case on multiple fronts. Fraudulent use of personal information was a criminal matter. The occupation of the property without financial contribution and without formal tenancy could be addressed through the landlord and tenant board, but given the evidence of fraud and physical intimidation, she would recommend pursuing an emergency order through the court. She asked me if there had been any physical incidents. I told her about the hallway, about Marcus's hand on my chest, about the wall. She wrote it down. She asked if there were any witnesses. I told her Sophie had been at the top of the stairs. 8 years old, she had seen. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Mrs. Collins, I want to be direct with you. This process will be difficult. Your daughter and her husband will likely push back. It may affect your relationship with your grandchildren, at least for a period of time. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about Sophie at the top of the stairs. I thought about what she was learning, week by week, about what a home was supposed to feel like, about what it looked like when a woman disappeared into the edges of her own life so that other people could be comfortable. "I'm prepared," I said. I went back to the house that evening and I was calm. I made dinner. I ate alone in my room as I had gotten used to doing. I heard Marcus on the phone in the kitchen, laughing about something, using my good coffee mugs, rearranging my life around himself like he had been doing for almost a year. I kept calm. I waited. The confrontation came the following Saturday, 3 days before Patricia had scheduled the emergency motion. I had not planned for it to happen the way it did. Marcus had decided, without asking anyone, to have a group of people over for what he called a housewarming, in my house, in January. He had sent messages to people referring to the house on Elm Grove as his place, we found out later, a housewarming, as though he had moved in somewhere new, and the space was his to claim. I came downstairs that Saturday evening, and there were 11 people in my living room and kitchen. My good dishes were out. The wine from the rack in the pantry, wine Raymond and I had brought back from a trip to Niagara-on-the-Lake the summer before he got sick, was open on the counter. Marcus was playing music through a Bluetooth speaker he had set to a volume that made the windows rattle. I walked into the kitchen and I asked him, directly, why there were strangers in my house. He looked at me with that look he had perfected over months. Patient, condescending, a look that said I was being embarrassing. Relax, Margaret. It's just a few people. Go back to your room if you're tired. I told him I was not going back to my room. I told him I wanted the music turned down and I wanted to know why he had used my personal information to take out a line of credit without my consent. The kitchen went quiet. One of his friends stepped back. Claire appeared in the doorway. Marcus set down his drink. His voice dropped. I don't know what you think you know, but you're making a scene in front of our guests. I said, these are not your guests. This is not your house. And if you'd like to have this conversation in front of everyone here, I am perfectly happy to do that. Claire said, Mom, please? I looked at my daughter. I had prepared for this moment in my head many times in the previous 2 weeks. I had thought about what I would say. But standing there looking at her, I did not feel anger. I felt something much sadder than anger. I felt the distance between who she had been when she was young and who she had let herself become, and I felt the grief of that clearly and completely, and then I set it aside because I had a job to do. I said to Claire, I know about the line of credit. I know about the copies of the deed. I know what was said in your bedroom 2 weeks ago. I heard it. Her face went pale. Marcus stepped toward me. That is when it happened. He put his hand on my chest, flat-palmed, and pushed. Not with his full strength. Just enough to make the point about who was supposed to move and who was supposed to stay still. I stumbled back. My shoulder hit the door frame. I heard Sophie from upstairs. She had been watching from the top of the staircase again. She cried out my name. That was enough. I straightened myself. I looked at Marcus. I said, You just made a significant mistake. I went back to my room. I called my neighbor Janet on the other side of the fence. I told her what had happened. She came over within 10 minutes and sat with me while I packed a bag. She didn't ask questions. She just sat with me and handed me things when I pointed at them and when I was ready. She walked me out through the back door and through her yard to her house. We passed the fire pit. I could hear the party continuing on the other side of the house, like nothing had happened at all. Janet made tea. I called Patricia from her kitchen. I described the physical incident. Patricia said we were moving the timeline up. I stayed with Janet for 3 nights. On the second night, she showed me something on her phone. She had been watching from her upstairs window that afternoon and had seen Marcus and Claire entertaining in the backyard, using the fire pit, the patio furniture, the lights I had bought and never gotten around to stringing up. Someone had strung them up now, in time for the party. There were 8 or 9 people out there. Claire was laughing. Someone had made a fire. Marcus had his arm around her shoulder. They looked like people who owned a home and were enjoying it. Janet said, I'm sorry, Maggie. I'm really sorry. I looked at the photo for a long time. Then I asked her if I could borrow her laptop. Patricia moved quickly once the medical documentation was in order. The hospital had photographed my shoulder and the bruising along my upper back from where I hit the doorframe. The police report had been filed. The fraudulent credit application had been reported to the RCMP Financial Crimes Unit. We had the bank's written confirmation, the expense notebook, and the statement from Patricia's paralegal who had documented the signature discrepancy. We also had 2 witnesses to the physical altercation, Janet, who had arrived within minutes and seen the state I was in, and the accounts of Marcus's own guests, 2 of whom had contacted me through Janet's daughter the following day, saying they were disturbed by what they had witnessed and were willing to make statements. The emergency motion was granted by the Ontario Superior Court on a Thursday morning. The order required Marcus and Claire to vacate the property within 48 hours. It froze any attempt to list, transfer, or encumber the property while the fraud investigation was ongoing. A bailiff and 2 officers from the Ottawa Police Service would attend the property to ensure compliance. Patricia drove with me to Elm Grove Drive. Janet came too. It was a bright February day, cold in the way that Ottawa is cold in February, the kind of cold that makes everything look sharp and clear. There was fresh snow on the driveway and no one had shoveled it. The officers knocked. Marcus answered. He was in a t-shirt and looked like he had just woken up. He looked at the uniform, then at the papers, then passed them at me standing on the front walk. His face ran through several things quickly. Surprise, calculation, ennui. And then something I had not expected. Recognition. He had known, somewhere underneath everything, that this moment was possible. That was why he had been moving so quickly. He just thought he had more time. Claire appeared behind him. She looked at me without speaking for a long moment. I said to her, "I want you to listen to me. I am not doing this to hurt you. I am doing this because what has been happening in this house is not acceptable, and I should have said so much sooner. I should have said it the first time Marcus rearranged my kitchen without asking. I should have said it the first time you asked me to give up my bedroom and I said no and you asked again. I should have protected myself and I didn't, and that is something I will have to think about. But I am saying it now." Claire's eyes were wet. She said, "Mom." I said, "I love you. I will always love you. But you need to leave my house." The officers gave them 4 hours to gather essentials. The rest could be arranged later through scheduled access with a third party present. Sophie stood at the top of the stairs again, watching, her socks on the wrong feet the way she always put them when she dressed herself. I climbed the stairs and sat beside her while the adults moved around below us. He held her hand. I told her none of this was her fault. I told her that grown-ups sometimes made bad choices, and that didn't make them unlovable. It just meant that other grown-ups had to set limits on what was allowed. She leaned against my shoulder. I could feel her breathing slow down. When Marcus and Claire loaded the last of what they were taking into the car, Marcus looked at me once from the driveway. He started to say something and then didn't. He got into the car. Claire hugged Sophie for a long time on the front steps. She looked at me over her daughter's head. "We'll be at my sister's," she said, "in case you need to reach us." I said, "I know. Take care of yourself." She got in the car. They drove away. The sound of the car turning off the street was the loneliest sound I had heard in a long time. Janet stood beside me. The bailiff completed his paperwork and handed me the house keys. My house keys. I had not held them in months. Someone had moved them off the hook by the door to a drawer in the kitchen, so there would be room on the hook for their things. I held the keys and stood at the front door. Sophie was still beside me. "Grandma, can I stay?" I looked at Janet. She nodded slightly. I said, "Let's go inside and I'll make you some hot chocolate and we'll call your parents after." We went in. The house looked different than I expected. It had been lived in aggressively. There were marks on the walls I didn't recognize. The curtains Marcus had bought were still up. The kitchen had been rearranged again since the last time I had seen it. The living room smelled like other people, but it was mine. Every floorboard, every window frame, every inch of it was mine, and no one was going to tell me otherwise. I put my key on the hook by the door. I made hot chocolate. Sophie sat at the kitchen table and told me about her class at school and a book she was reading about horses, and I listened to every word. That evening, after Janet took Sophie to her parents at Claire's sister's house, I walked through every room. I opened windows in spite of the cold, just for a few minutes, just to clear the air. I took down the gray curtains and put my cream ones back up. I took my clothes out of the boxes in the back room and carried them to the master bedroom and hung them in the closet where they belonged. I put Raymond's photograph on the nightstand. I moved the armchair back in front of the living room window. I cleaned the kitchen until 2 in the morning. I was not tired. I was the opposite of tired. I was more awake than I had been in over a year. The fraud investigation took several months. Marcus was ultimately charged with 2 counts of identity theft and 1 count of fraud over $5,000 under the criminal code. The $12,000 drawn on the fraudulent line of credit was ordered to be repaid. My lawyers filed a civil claim for the household expenses I had documented over the 11 months, and we reached a settlement that recovered most of it. Claire and I did not speak for 6 weeks. Then she called on a Sunday morning when I was in the garden, the first warm day in March, turning the soil where I was going to plant tomatoes. I let the phone ring twice before I answered. She said she was sorry. Not in the careful, managed way she had apologized for things throughout the past year, but in the real way, the way that cost something. She said she had let things happen that she should have stopped. She said she had let Marcus convince her that her mother was the problem when she should have known better. She said she was sorry for the line of credit. She said she didn't know about it until after, and I believe her on that, because some things I know about my daughter even after everything. I told her I believed her. I told her I was not ready to pretend none of it happened. I told her I needed time. She said she understood. She asked about Sophie. I told her Sophie was doing well, that Sophie had called me 3 times since that day on the front steps, that we had talked about the horse book and about a project for school and about nothing important, which was everything. I did not tell her that I cried after every one of those calls. That is mine to carry. The garden came in well that summer. I had not had a proper garden in 2 years because the backyard had been Marcus's territory, his fire pit and his parties and his space. In June I planted the tomatoes and the beans, and along the back fence a row of sweet peas the way my mother used to grow them. Janet came over on Saturday mornings, and we drank coffee on the patio and watched the bees. I got my hair cut shorter than I had worn it in 30 years, and I liked it. I called an old colleague from the hospital, and we went to Stratford for the theater 2 nights, and it was the first trip I had taken since Raymond died. I thought about Marcus sometimes. Not with hatred. Hatred takes too much energy, and I had better things to do with mine. I thought about the way he had moved through my house as though ownership were simply a matter of confidence, as though a woman living alone was an open door. I thought about how many houses like mine there probably were, occupied by people who had quietly made themselves small so someone else could feel large. I thought about Sophie asking if she could stay that evening, in her wrong way socks, in the middle of everything falling apart, asking if she could stay. Children know what safety looks like, even before they have the words for it. There is a morning I return to in my mind. Early July, the light coming through the cream curtains the way I always loved it, slow and particular, landing on the kitchen table where I sat with my tea and my newspaper. The house was completely quiet, my own quiet, chosen mine. A cardinal was doing something noisy in the sweet pea trellis. The tomatoes needed staking. I had a list of things to do and enough time to do all of them. I thought about what Claire had said in that phone call, that she had let Marcus convince her that her mother was the problem. I understood how that happened. I had watched it happen, and I had not been able to stop it. But sitting in that kitchen in the July light, I understood something else too. I had also let it happen, in my own way. Not the fraud, not the violence. Those were never mine to prevent. But the rest of it, the slow surrendering of room after room, decision after decision. I had been so afraid of becoming the difficult mother, the bitter one, the one who couldn't let her children live their own lives, that I had let them live mine instead. That was over now. I am 67 years old. I own a house on Elm Grove Drive in Ottawa, Ontario. My name, Margaret Ann Collins, is the only name on the deed, and that is how it will stay for as long as I am alive. I have a garden. I have a neighbor who knows me well enough to come through the back fence when I need her. I have a granddaughter who asks me about horses on the phone and calls me every Sunday without fail. I have, against all odds, and after more than a year of making myself small, a life that belongs entirely to me. No one is ever going to move my curtains again. Did this story speak to you? If you listened all the way through, drop the number 1 in the comments. I read every single one. If you found value here, a like goes a long way in helping stories like this reach the people who need them most. There are more stories from real women right here on this channel, so take a look before you go. I'll see you in the next one.